Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is another podcast where the only thing we are going to do is serve all you wonderful investors out there, because we, Expert Dojo, as a fellow investor, have invested in yet another incredible company that we just want to let you know about. That's it. I want to help share the diligence that we've done so that it makes diligence a little bit easier for you. I want to make sure that it's in a nice, engaging, and entertaining way so that you can get all of the content you need. You're going to find out about the team. You're going to find out about the value proposition, the problem, the solution, the market size. You're going to find out about the investment received. You're going to find out about the plans for the company, everything you need to be able to say, yeah, this is a great founder. It's a great company. Expert Dojo made a great call. I like it. We're going to make an investment as well. So as always, do your own checking afterwards, but I make that checking much easier for you by just bringing you down the path, holding your hand. So today we got Greg, absolutely phenomenal entrepreneur. Mr. Greg Carroll is from ClinNEXUS. We invested in this company because we feel that healthcare in the US is kind of messed up, and there's so much potential for the people who know that and they nail the solution. What ClinNEXUS are doing is truly incredible. It is a huge play on the market. And it's one of those companies that if I talked about what they did and I put it into the future, 5 or 10 years in the future, and we talked about the fact that they were doing tens of millions of dollars a month in revenue, you'd look and you'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. I can imagine dealing with that amount of lives, solving that particular problem. I could absolutely see that they would be dealing with that. So we're going to go through that journey so you find out a little bit more. But first of all, Mr. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. Appreciate it. And yeah, you can call me Dr. Greg if you like.
I like that. Yeah, I'm going for Dr. Greg, actually. And so I want to talk about your journey. And I want to talk about like what took you from the wonderful life, which is incredibly demanding and what you have to do with patients. Like doctors are absolute top of everything as far as respect for how you keep the world a safe and happy and healthy place. But once you make it, right? You can at least make sure that you can eliminate the financial instability by following what you did. And you decided to go for a higher path. And you decided that you were going to solve a problem, not more important, but more scalable, right? Do you want to talk about the genesis of the idea and how did you come up with ClinNEXUS?
Brian, such a good question.
Why did you make the decision?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I mean, you're right. As a practicing emergency physician, financially, it's quite predictable. But I'll tell you, the many nights and days of working in the emergency department, seeing, and it gets deeply personal quickly, right? Seeing patients, their families coming into the hospital 2:00 in the morning. They'd been discharged from the hospital. They'd had no support coming out of the hospital. No one had ensured that they had their medications. No one was supporting them around transportation. No one was making sure that they had access and support for any of their in-home care. For me, just over time, I started really finding the need to move beyond the four walls of the emergency department. It's one thing to call out an issue, right? It's another thing to then go out and do something about it. And so for me, to move out of the four walls of the emergency department, and then it got very personal for me because my own parents have complex health issues, even helping them navigate coming out of the hospital or after a procedure, I found incredibly challenging. So I could only imagine people that had fewer resources than I did, had less time, had less expertise and experience. I could only imagine what their lives were like. And, and this was a compounding issue. And so we were seeing more and more unnecessary readmissions to the hospital. We were seeing more and more duplication of studies in the emergency department. We were seeing more and more unnecessary death because of inadequate care coordination and support coming out of the hospital. So it got very, very personal for me. And then also looking down the road, Brian, in terms of the size of this issue, 10,000 Americans are turning 65 every day for the next 30 years. Every one of us is adding on more and more chronic health issues. So this is an issue that's not linear. It's compounding, at an almost exponential rate in terms of the complexity and why this is such an important issue to tackle.
And so you made the jump, but how did you decide to tackle it? How did you decide to make sure that this was something that you were going to be able to make a massive impact in? Because all of the things that you've just said there are so huge, are so complex, are so wide reaching. Like, how does one person or even 100 person solve any of them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's about relationships initially, right? It's about establishing a relationship with the site of care for these individuals, understanding and building a team like we have that understand the complexities, that have the ability to go in and make the connections. Ultimately, this is about making connections, right? Where traditional US healthcare, the hospital maybe wasn't aligned with the primary care group. And what we do is we come in and we've built a team that can create and bridge those relationships. And then we can build the infrastructure that establishing ready communication so that you can identify people in need, building a tech team or an informatics team that can make those connections, can collect in and bring in the data that we need to act. And then also really identifying those early customers, establishing a relationship and understanding what their true operational gaps are and building a team around that as we've done. And the reality is a lot of it's low tech. Now there's tons of tech stack opportunity down the road, but initially it's simply getting people in place that can be that one-on-one relationship with the patient. The primary care docs, they don't have the bandwidth, the desire to do that work. The hospital doesn't have the bandwidth desire. So we establish that one-on-one relationship with the patient. We take that off of the plate of the hospital and off of the plate of the primary care group. And so it's really relative. I mean, we can scale this up quickly with not a huge tech stack, but over time, we can create efficiencies around that. We can create automated decision-making protocols as we've done. We can bring in predictive analytics, all of those things. That's over time, and that's how we get super, super efficient with our capital. But early on, it's about creating that one-on-one for the patient, which they're lacking right now in the system.
Yeah. And you made the decision, rather than go direct to consumer, you made the decision to go for groups which have a lot of lives that they are responsible for. Talk to us a little bit about, first of all, the decision to do that as the way to go best access to market, and then also how you actually executed that strategy.
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. And the first thing I'll say is, I think there are great direct-to-consumer help. There are great direct-to-consumer healthcare offerings out there, and absolutely, and there is value there. But to truly impact outcomes, right? To truly get to the point where people are having access and that they're having the resources they need to successfully navigate after a hospital stay. To do that, you can't go off and do that alone, direct-to-consumer. You have to do it at enterprise level. And that's why we made the decision to do this work at an enterprise level. Now, look, we understand it takes time to establish those relationships, but we've already done that early work around anchor customers where we can really compress that cycle, if you will, of getting there with an enterprise level. But to really impact outcomes and really impact these people's lives, we made the decision that we need to do this at an enterprise level. When I say enterprise level, I mean with large primary care networks, 150,000 patients or more, large hospital systems across multiple regions, and then also another part of that is eventually working and selling directly into the payers, because that's when truly you can scale, because the payers can then direct us into regions that really need most of these services. But to go to market, it's to your question on how we're doing this, it's work directly with one delivery system, 150,000 patient network in California, really build that credibility in the space, establish that relationship, start creating that network effect, and start demonstrating that we can do this work, which traditionally has been hard, but that's the opportunity. And then, as we're doing right now, nailing this with this first partner, establishing our performance metrics that we can then go and present to hospital systems and payers. But in the meantime, to answer your question directly around our go-to-market, very focused right now in California. 8 of the 10 largest systems that we target in the country are in California. In fact, they're within a 3-hour radius of each other. So with our first partnership, we're creating a network effect that spans the delivery side, the hospital network side and the payer side, all at the same time. So we're starting to see a virtuous network effect, if you will.
Wonderful. And in any great hero's journey, and this is a hero's journey, you have the detractors and the challenges and the obstacles and the difficult pieces. And generally, it's at the beginning. And like this whole journey is impossible until one day it's not. And that's kind of how it works. And sometimes that one day is a year or 2 years or 5 years or 6 months. But most definitely in that first 6 to 12 months, it is incredibly challenging. So many things come because I think mainly because there's so many unknowns that you have to deal with. Speak to us about the challenges that you faced and how you overcame those challenges.
Yeah, it's that great question. I mean, it's let me just go a high level real quick. Right? And I'll say, like, why is the time now to do this work? I'll start there, right? So we have that courage of conviction because this is the time to do this work. We now have alignment. We're getting more aligned incentives from payers, aligned with the delivery side, aligned with state agencies and federal agencies that are saying, this is the time to do this work. And now it's being incentivized. Fees around this space, there are billable codes. Payers have increased fees that they're providing around this. We now have aligned incentives with the hospital, the primary care networks, and those. But that's why the time is absolutely right. But I will say, of course, there are challenges, and in those challenges are where the opportunity is. And it also helps us create a competitive or defensive moat over time, right? Meaning the biggest challenge often is just creating a relationships to make sure there's an exchange of information or data, meaning to know when a patient's coming out of the hospital, to be able to get upstream of that discharge, to be able to start engaging that hospital team that's caring for them and managing them as they come out of the hospital. Allows us to front load, identify their needs efficiently and quickly. So that's a lift. And again, that gets back to the team we've built. And that's our ability to pull these informatics. And in terms of, that's also a part of the time's right for that now. We're now seeing adoption of integrated information networks with hospitals and providers and payers that we didn't have in the past. We're now seeing primary care networks and hospitals that are more comfortable having data outside of their electronic health record. In the past, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have done this work, but I would do it now because that data, although there is still work getting that data organized, we can now access it. And the institutions that we're working with are more comfortable with that data being outside of their repository, if you will. So that's certainly a challenge. There's also a timeliness element to this. We've got to get to the spot quickly. And again, we've built a team that can get to the spot with operations that are really focused on getting to that person within a critical time when these people are most vulnerable. So that's an obstacle. But we've certainly solved for that in terms of, the expertise, the team, and the delivery and the care providers that we've assembled.
And you mentioned team a few times now. Talk to us about the team. Talk to us about who you have around you, both advisors and everybody else who's assisting you with making sure that you can have the absolute best product in market.
Yeah, great. Excellent. So I'll start with myself. So we talked about my background, but after being an emergency physician, I went on to join an early stage organization. We built a 125 center urgent care network around the country. And we did this traditionally at the time where it was all onesie, twosie urgent cares, but we decided to do joint ventures with large hospital systems, which at the time people said, you're crazy. Brian, like some of the earlier points you were making, massive obstacles, but that's where the opportunity was. So we did 6 joint ventures around the country. Mercy, largest health system in the Midwest, Northwell, largest in New York, Dignity, West Coast, throughout the country, really. And through that, and then rapidly scaled that. So we went from 2 million in revenue to 200 million in revenue. And I was the third exec on the team around that work. So really, for me, understanding how to do these integrations, how to knock out the obstacles that we discussed earlier, but then also how to scale revenue quickly and how to do it through a joint venture model that's similar to ours to some extent. In terms of the rest of the team, I've mentioned a couple times now the informatics piece. Our chief info officer was an executive with Harvard Pilgrim Health, which is a payer, with Massachusetts Blue Cross, which is another payer, large scaled up payer. And so, having the expertise both on the delivery side, but then having the expertise in terms of how to speak the language of payers is incredibly valuable. And then in the rest of the team, we have several teams members that have operationalized virtual primary care networks at scale, built chronic management disease programs, all in the digital space. So, pulling all that together, we've got a strong team. And then we've got an advisory board that includes the president, both who leads and built Mayo Clinic's entire digital platform across the country. So we've got strong advisory, team that has depth and breadth, and same thing on the management side operationally.
Fantastic. And then, okay, let's move into the next piece, which is traction moving forward. So right now you've raised some money, which is fantastic.
Yep.
You've had tremendous success previously, which is wonderful. Like top 3 people in a company that's doing $200 million in revenue. You know how to do this. Like this is a rinse and repeat, just in a bigger space with a much more direct impact that you can give to a wider group of people. But it's a rinse and repeat all the same. We know that you have the chops to be able to do it, and we know that you have the background, and we know that you're bringing the people around you. So now let's talk about how much money has been raised so far? How much money are you raising right now, whichever way you want to approach it? And then speak to how that's going to tie into traction later on this year. How many of these folks, these groups, are we actually going to bring in? And how do you believe that's going to impact on the future growth of the company?
Yeah. So quickly, what I'll do is I'll just say, right now we've got the second largest delivery network in California in the space as our anchor customer. We're operationalizing that right now.
Nice.
We go live with revenue within the next month.
How can you say that
within the next few weeks?
How can you say this without smiling? If you're listening to the podcast, you can't see he's not smiling, but you have to smile at this. This is huge.
Yeah, it's massive, right? So this is our anchor partnership. It represents 25 to 30,000 in MRR on a conservative basis. We think there's much more opportunity even within this one network. It's central in California. We're being very, very focused on go-to-market. We're targeting, like I said, 8 of the 10 largest systems in the country that we target are within a 3-hour radius of this health system. So I'll give you an example. So through that relationship, we have an executive forum on March 3rd, where we're bringing together executives on the payer side, the delivery side, and also the hospital side. We're bringing them together to share the success we've had with this anchor customer, which sets us up, Brian, to your point. We want to, and by the end of 2023, we want to close on 3 additional partnerships. And we think these 3 additional partnerships are going to come from this ecosystem that we're nurturing right now. That would take us from 25 to 30,000 in monthly recurring revenue with this initial partnership. That gets us north of $100,000 in monthly recurring revenue on a projected basis by the end of 2023. So we're very, very focused. And the beauty is efficient use of this capital, being very focused and having a market where we can create this virtuous ecosystem, if you will.
And what's so powerful here, these people don't go away. These are not 9-month SaaS contracts. These are people who are trusting these providers with their lives of their people, hundreds of thousands of members. Like when you build these relationships, you have to break the relationship for it to go away. If you provide good product, good tech, good service, good support, you keep them for 30, 40, 50 years. These people become the folks who come to your kids' and your grandkids' weddings, right? And so that's what's so powerful here. This is why many of the healthcare institutions in America have been just in situ for such a long period of time, because they build their relationships, they do their dues, and then they stay. And nobody's pushing them out. So that's what I love about your play here, Greg. It's that you're bringing such an important product to so many people who need it, and then you're coming in through the door of the folks who will show the most amount of loyalty if you just make life easier for them by making sure that their people get great help.
It's the only reason you would do these enterprise level sales. If you're going to get to 1-year contracts, like, lift up stakes, go do something else. These are long-term, and I've been doing this scale of joint ventures for 15 years now across 3 different companies that are still operating, profitable, huge returns to investors, and with virtually no churn in any of those contracts. And that's the beauty of, Brian, your support and your investment in us and the other investors that had joined us early on is seeing the potential of that. And so we're very much appreciative of that. And now it's paying off because having this 1 anchor customer live and bringing in revenue, again, typical healthcare, huge herd mentality. Once the other systems see this, they want it.
I agree. And it's so powerful. It's such a pleasure bringing you in. I remember when we first met, and I thought, if this man with all of the potential of what he can do is prepared to give up his heartbeats to go after such an important endeavor, then for crying out loud, if we can't afford to put some money in behind this, then shame on us. And because these things are important. And sometimes in life, you get to deal not just with investments that can give great returns, but also within an area whereby you need to change so that folks can get a better coming. So I like this. Now, we're going to get to in a moment where I want you to look in the future. I want you to go 10 years out. I want you to look at what you've achieved over these 10 years. And I want you to talk about the exit that you achieved and what the company became. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to think about it, because the moving on from what the product is today to where it's going to go in the future, I think is going to be a huge move. This is going to be tremendously important for kind of the next level of where you evolve to. But it all starts where you are right now. So if you look, we've talked a little bit about the traction in 2024. And before we get to that last question, talk to me about how you evolved the product throughout 2023. Like, what happens next? You've got this great new customer. They're coming in. They're trusting you. Much of what you're going to be providing to the customer is a very high level of service, which is then going to layer in products and technology alongside with that. How do you see that developing just this year for the moment to give people a feel? And how much money do you need to raise to do that?
Perfect. So the first part, if you look at a lot of the digital health space, these hybrid solutions historically take more time to get a bit more time to get up to that value that 10 years down the road. Maybe it's 8 with another more digital, or excuse me, just a more of a tech solution. But where we are, especially around coordination of care, which, like I said, the complexity is compounding. The hybrid model is the way to go. Meaning, especially if you look at the maturity, a lot of these health systems and these payers and these delivery networks, they're looking for a hybrid solution, meaning some human element, like human agency, a relationship with a human, but then also the tech and the efficiency. So that's exactly how we're going about this, right? So if you look at 2023, so we go to market with a team of virtual care coordinators, which are telephonic, text-based communications, telephonic. And through that, we can grab a ton of market share with that. And we can go fast. We can go deep. Most importantly, we can really establish these relationships, which will sell into partner 2, 3, and 4. However, certainly for us, if we think about operating margin, we think there's operating margin with a low-tech solution. We think there's just a massive amount of margin as we start to think about additional opportunities around the product. So moving from more manual texting to automated texting protocols. So we'll have intellectual property around our protocols, but then also moving into automated solutions around those communications. And then the huge piece is also thinking about as we start to layer in predictive analytics over time. And that's the ability to take in all this data that we will be aggregating and understanding when a patient comes out of the hospital and they have these elements, we can predict who's going to need more resources and maybe who's going to use less resources. That allows us to be very targeted and to become very, very efficient with our capital, with our labor, and gets us closer to hopefully SaaS margins over time with the model.
I love that. It makes total sense. Okay, before we get to the last question, email contacts so folks can contact you.
Pardon me?
Your email contact so folks can contact you afterwards.
Please.
Let's just share that. And then I want to go into our last question. I don't want any buffers on the last one.
And I still have to answer your question on the capital. So of course we need to hit that. So it's Gregory, GREGORY.Carroll, CARROLL at ClinNEXUS.com. CLINNEXUS.com.
Wonderful. Okay. Capital. What do you need?
So we're raising a total of $1 million in this round.
Very much. Yeah.
The beauty is everything we've been talking about, Brian, this team has done with $250,000. Okay. Everything we've talked about, anchor customer, operationalizing, getting to revenue, getting cash flow coming in, doing all that with the amount of capital we've raised through angel and venture to date. Also, we've built a sales team that's already started, as I mentioned, is executing on customer 2, 3, and 4 in 2023. So that's with that amount of capital. We're working. We want to finish off this round at $1 million raise, so another $750,000 to bring in. And what that will allow us to do is, one, marketing infrastructure to nail part, 2, 3, and 4, really to operationalize those. But this investment is going directly into scaling revenue, right? We've done a lot of the hard work establishing that first relationship. We've done the work around understanding like what is the right product market fit for this service. And so any money that we're bringing in right now is going to directly impact revenue and scaling up. So that's where we are right now. And so I appreciate the question, but we'd like to raise that. We'd like to round it off at $1 million in this round.
And I'll add one comment on that before we move into the last question of the day. And that is, most of the time with early stage companies, one of the challenging parts for an investor is that you invest all of your money into the technology, and then you just hope that the 10% that goes into marketing, if you or I am lucky, actually turns into a growth that then can be turned into something even better and better and better. In this particular case, it's all going into sales and marketing. It's not going into technology. The sales and marketing will drive the revenue. The revenue will drive the growth. The growth will drive the technology build that will then be added on afterwards. So you get everything on this, including a company that's able to drive its way to Series A. So I like it. So Greg, take me to where you are in the future. It's 10 years' time. You have just exited out. You are sitting with a far more important person from Bloomberg. And the person from Bloomberg is sitting up very straight. And that person is saying, tell me, Dr. Carroll, tell me what it was like, this roller coaster that took you to a company that exited for this value. Tell me the impact that you had on the world by bringing not just your great medical skills to bear, but also a team of people who have truly transformed healthcare to a better place.
Yeah.
Dr. Carroll.
Well, thank you. It's the most important work we're doing in healthcare right now, bar none. And that is creating a system where there is communication between institutions, where and this is a future that is absolutely accomplishable, and we're a part of that, and we're a central part of that. We focused initially on a narrow part of the value chain, but I'll tell you, it was the weakest part of the value chain. And when we started this company, but what we did through that is we started identifying value adjacencies, and so going from just managing that coming out of the hospital, what's called transition care management, then we started taking on complex patient populations that need longitudinal ongoing care versus just when they come out of the hospital. Transition care management has been beautiful because it puts us really in a distribution. We can control some distribution there, and that sets us up, as we've done, to take over more and more of these patients' ongoing care over time. The infrastructure that we're building early, it's elements that can be reapplied to more ongoing services. So for us to get up to 100 million in revenue, which I have no doubt we will do, we're going to be able to take on value adjacencies that aren't huge reaches. And these value adjacencies are the most important work in healthcare right now. And that is taking people, 80% of the costs in healthcare are driven by 20% of patients. So if we get to those managing or being a central function of managing those 20%, those patients over time, we're impacting the healthcare in a massive way. And that's how we get to be $100 million in revenue company and beyond. And for a valuation that's certainly well north of that.
Phenomenal. Thank you, my friend. I am absolutely delighted we got to invest in you. Even more delighted that I got to know you. I love what you're building here. I think all investors who are listening should take note and make sure that they get in connection with you. As I mentioned to everybody, for any reason you can't catch Greg, just shoot me over an email to brian@expertdojo.com and I would love to have a chat. But for today, that's a wrap.